actually, this is the way they express the love for their motherland, and this is their mode of being. Now, what's going on is that Nehru is, in a way, after telling us what these people are saying, is speaking for them and saying, they're saying this, but I've figured out what they're actually saying, which I can make sense of. I can make sense of, and therefore, this is what they're saying. But actually, they may be saying something completely different. Now, our historians for a long time didn't really bother to even ask whether these people said things or had forms of knowledge or had forms of culture that were worth historically kind of recording or writing about. It was just thought that, if we are marching down to modernity and we are trying to catch up with the West, let's write about all those things that help us, down that road, and not those things that we think are not helping. And so, certain people and certain groups and certain kinds of ideas became irrelevant to that kind of progressivist view of history.
Actually reading about Modi and whatever was going on in riots and all that, do you as historians have any responsibility to report a certain kind of event within a certain duration of time so that you can actually influence public opinion, or is that like, because I see him distorting history right now. Whatever people will be see the legacy of Modi, whatever happens after let's say this election, 10 years henceforth, people will be reading, people will be seeing a completely different aspect of him depending, based on populism and his development and everything else. What about the lost stories and questions about minorities and everything? Like this history have to be reported within a certain duration of time, to actually be relevant. And the fact that we also see a lot of events being made, like a lot of movies being made on relevant events. Like in the West, we have movies being made on current issues. Here there's so much. We see the politics around us, which does not allow issues to actually be reported within time so as to influence public opinion. And
I don't think history needs to be relevant. I mean, I think historians are not political scientists. They are not journalists. They are not meant to be telling you who to vote for in the next elections or what the rights and wrongs of Narendra Modi are. They are there to give you a much longer term perspective about the history of the subcontinent. I mean, I think the best answer to Modi from historians would actually be to demolish the whole concept of Hindutva by going centuries back and showing what an artificial construct it is, that there was no such, concept until the RSS came along and invented it. So I think those are the kind of tasks that historians should be addressing. I don't think we should confuse that with journalism. Historians are not journalists, in my opinion.
I think history is a form of thinking. It's a form of knowledge. And as any form of knowledge, it has certain kinds of protocols and certain procedures and disciplines that historians follow. And if you're looking at any event, whether it's Modi or it's, let's say, the case of Ram Janmabhoomi in 1992. Now, historians are sometimes called upon to sort of ask whether this case is true or that case is true, whether this is right or that is right. And all historians can do is, using the protocols of their discipline, they can explain what happened, okay, to the best of their ability. But and history is made into an issue of kind of political kind of a battle. And sometimes I find that, particularly now in India, history is often pulled into all kinds of political battles, and one is asked to say, okay, as a historian, what do you have to say about this issue or that issue, and so on. And sometimes I regret that in the West, in the United States, when I teach, for example, we have seminars, for example, a seminar might be on, 13th century, some, monastery. And there's no sense, or there's no expectation that historical discourse has anything to do with what's happening in the United States at that time. Nor are you expected to say, okay, since this happened in the 13th century, what do you have to say about, Edward Snowden's disclosures? I mean, nobody asks you that, and sometimes I feel that, my goodness, here, history is so apolitical. And then sometimes I come in India, and then everyone asks me, also as a historian, what do you think about this issue? I mean, I can't actually provide guidelines, I mean, as a historian, you deal with certain issues and you try to, provide a kind of form of knowledge that is appropriate to history. What, people do with it is a different matter. I remember actually in 1992, I was discussing this with someone in Delhi, and he was saying, okay, as a historian, you tell me, was there a temple there or not? And I said to him, okay, let's assume that there was a temple. Let's assume that there was a temple. And that temple is demolished. Now what are you going to do? So the question really is not whether there was a temple or not, but what are you going to do as Hindus and Muslims in this country? Are you going to live as common citizens, or are you going to kill each other? Are you going to use history as a form of retribution to correcting certain wrongs, or are you going to decide that even if there was a temple, certain things have happened and you can't undo certain things, and we'll decide to live with each other? So, in a way, that's the question, not really, whether you were right or wrong, whether there was a temple or not. If there was a temple, then we'll, dig it up. I'll tell you a kind of funny story. I was working on history of science at one point, and I had a kind of postdoctoral position at Caltech. It's a huge kind of scientific place. And the public relations department over there got a letter from Bengal. And this woman, she said, I opened the letter, and the letter was from a village in Midnapur. It said, "Dear sir, you are a premier scientific institution in the world. Recently my wife gave birth to a child, a girl child. We think she is going to be she's a genius, and she's going to be a scientist. And so I am enclosing her umbilical cord, requesting you to bury it somewhere in your campus." Now, this happened after 1992, and so she asked me, so what should I do? I said, you should honor his wishes and bury it somewhere. And then I thought, my goodness, what if 10 years later they come and say, the umbilical cord is buried there, we'll, demolish the entire building in order to, reclaim our heritage, So I said, well, keep that in mind, but, they buried it, and there's so far no problem. But, I mean, this is just an anecdote, but, the point is that, really the issue is not so much whether, you're factually right about this or not, but really what you want to do with your present and with your future, which is not a question that history can supply you an answer with.
Sorry, I just have to say, Gyan, I'm going to have to leave in 5 minutes.
Okay.
So you're very welcome to carry on with Gyan, but if you have any specific questions for me, you have 5 minutes.
Do you think every work of non-fiction by historians should come with a footnote? The content is factually correct, but the point of view is that of the author, so please form judgments accordingly.
I don't think it's necessary, because I think, anyone who's sort of literate ought to know that if they're reading a work of fiction, it is a work of fiction.
No, I'm talking about non-fiction.
Sorry, you're talking about non-fiction. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry, I misunderstood you. No, because I think, again, any work that you read, whether by a social scientist, an economist, a political scientist, a historian, you realize it's their interpretation. I mean, economists disagree violently. If you read Amartya Sen or Mr. Bhagwati, you will have two completely opposing views of the same situation. You know that they have their own interpretation. I don't think it should be different for historians.
There's one last question over here.
I'm told we can take one more question.
There.
Sure.
So, history is based on facts. Do you feel Indian historians have done enough for Indian history?
For Indian history?
Yeah, because I just read a book, a small book, saying that the Aryan invasion theory is actually not correct.
I'm not an expert on the Aryan invasion theory. We were brought up on it.
Yeah, I just read a book on that.
I mean, there certainly has been a large volume of historical writing within India. I can't say whether it's enough, you know, at what point do we say it's enough, but, you know, maybe not enough writing on ancient and medieval history, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jan, but I think really since Ramila Thapar's work, there's been very little of any consequence on ancient and medieval history, much more on the modern period and the nationalist movement, etc.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can take any other questions,
No.
but okay, we keep your heart, we give you one more question. There you go.
So my question is quite related to his. As he said that, in your opinion, do you think historians have done enough to justify, in a justified manner, to cover things which deserved coverage? Like when we grew up studying history, we hardly could ever read about northeastern states. So was there never worth anything, you know, deserving coverage, or what was it?
I think it was quite political, because, I mean, the northeastern states were not particularly integrated. Two of them wanted independence, Nagaland and Mizoram. I think we were not encouraged to explore their history, and I think, as someone else said, history has been written by the victors. We have forcibly integrated them into the Indian Union, and their history is now subsumed into the wider Indian history. Perhaps subaltern historians will take that up.
No, I mean, actually, I heard a talk recently by an Assamese writer, not a historian, and, you know, I mean, he made a point that Assamese literature is not allowed to have a kind of a normal existence, in the sense that all their literature is expected to be either, is it about, you know, integration into India, or is it about, you know, a struggle with the Bodos, or is it about something else? You know, you cannot just have a normal literature which is about love, romance, death, you know, kind of everyday life, because there is a kind of it's incumbent on them to say, what do you have to say about, you know, whether integration with India or not. And that, in a way, has been also a problem with history, the history from the Northeast, to the extent that it's been written, that it's always expected to be always about this, not about, okay, so what are the, you know, daily lives of people over there, how did they, you know, encounter, for example, life in the tea plantations and so on and so forth, you know. But, you know, that's the fate of many of societies and groups and areas that were considered marginal to the mainstream of, you know, modern Indian history.
Thank you so much. I hope that answers your question. And one question that comes from that end, which I cannot avoid, has to be done. Yes.
I'm South African, and in the last 25 years, history has changed a lot in South Africa. So much that my dad finds his histories different to my nephew's history, for example. And our history books then and how they look now, they're like two different things. So what has happened is a movie came along called Invictus. And this movie has like pulled South Africans together like you would not believe. And all of a sudden, because of a work of fiction based on a little bit of non-fiction, it like changed the country's whole perspective on and view of their country and pulled people over races and religions and things together like crazy. So even though it's fiction, and we shouldn't like go with that, we should go with the historical stuff. That is a great example for me how something that you see on screen can talk to people. So what my question is for you, Gyan, is how do you as a historian sit on a set and see your work of non-fiction being turned into fiction? How do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, you know, I think, you know, great fiction of any kind, whether it's cinematic or textual, great fiction has the power to change things. And, you know, we are now used to, in the 20th century, we are used to having professional politicians. But if you think of, you know, 17th, 18th, 19th century, some of the people that we would call politicians, they were artists, they were writers, and they had great influence. I mean, it's a kind of impoverishment of our politics now that we think politics only confined to, you know, a kind of professional class of, you know, thieves. And so, yes, you know, great film and great, you know, literature comes along that is able to move people and transform their thinking and so on. I mean, I can't even think of, you know, that my work will do something like that. But I'm looking forward to Bombay Velvet because it'll be a great film. And that's enough for me.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, the clock doesn't allow us to go any further. Thank you so much, the panelists up on stage. A big round of applause for Mr. Gyan Prakash and Mr. Zahir Hussain. I hope this gets you very clear with history and fiction. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We have our next session starting in about some time from now, let's say another 15 minutes. It's how many liberties can a biographer take?